All right, anatomy and physiology class. Good to be with you guys today, here on Wednesday. Today we're transitioning away from the skin, and we're going into our second major organ system, which is the skeletal system. So we're going to take a look at the skeletal system just by starting out with bone classification and histology. So a little bit about what the tissue of bones look like, about the makeup of bones and different types of bones, and we'll keep rolling from there. So we'll spend a little bit of time the next couple weeks with the bones. We'll move into the joints, and we'll be rolling right along with the skeleton. All right, so just remember that this is the first set of notes for exam 3. So this will not be on the exam for this Friday. All right, here we go. And just before we move past this one, this is the image on the back of all the slides. This is a microscopic image of bone tissue and what it looks like. And we'll take, some of those structures will mean a little bit more to you here soon. All right, so as I always like to do, some amazing facts about the human skeleton. The average skeleton weighs about 30 pounds, average human skeleton. We shrink about 1/4 of an inch a day. That's because our vertebral disc, remember that fibrocartilage, actually compresses and some of the liquid squeezes out of it. But then it's able to kind of fill back in with fluid when you lay down to sleep, and you get that 1/4 inch back. So if you want to get your height, do it first thing in the morning. This one always blows my mind. Your entire skeleton is replaced every 10 years. Okay, so every 10 years, you've got a new skeleton. We tend to think of bone as being this like solid rock-like structure that's just dry and old and it's just there, but it's not that way at all. It's a very dynamic tissue, constantly changing, constantly regenerating itself, constantly adapting to stresses we put on it or stresses we don't put on it. Very dynamic. All of our bones vary in hardness and flexibility. And of course, this is another confluence of structure and function, right? Our bones are going to meet the functions that they have to produce by the structure that's inside of them. Okay, so for example, a longhorned ram, those animals that butt heads with each other for fun, I guess, or for dominance purposes. I'm not exactly sure why. They can run into each other at 25 miles per hour, and that's both of them running 25 miles per hour at each other. And it doesn't fracture their skull. A human skull would fracture at 5 miles per hour with something like that. So same type of tissue, just a different function. All right, so let's look at the regions of the skeletal system. And so first of all, obviously it's bone involved in the skeletal system. We got the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. We've dealt with those in lab, okay? But then we've got hyaline cartilage, right? Elastic cartilage, fiber cartilage, and all those different types of cartilage are considered part of the skeleton, the skeletal system. Okay, so a little bit of a preview, clicker question here. What is a sesamoid bone? Sesamoid bone, pause it for a second, think about it if you're not sure. A sesamoid bone is this. It's a bone that's encased in a tendon, okay? Think of your patella. Think of that pisiform bone. Okay, you've got some other ones in your toes as well, and some other ones in different places. So there's a couple there that we've looked at, patella and pisiform. All right, so we've got classification of bones and different ways to do this. One of the ways that we classify bones is by the shape, okay? And so there's really 4 different categories there. There's long, short, irregular, and flat, okay? So take a second, pause it, and see if you can kind of match up which one you think is which. Look at the description there, and then look at these 4 examples here. See which one you can think is, you can come up with is which. Okay, pause it, then come back. All right, so hopefully you did that. You could probably figure out most of this. So a long bone, longer than wide. That one's pretty simple. I think you would guess that one. So A is our long bone. Short bone, a little bit trickier to tell on this one, but we'll get there in a sec. Irregular bone is B. Those vertebrae are considered irregular bones. Those are kind of tricky. They just don't really match any of the other shapes of the other categories. Okay, and then C is our flat bone. That's our sternum, right? Sternum and manubrium together with the xiphoid process sticking out. Okay, so that flat bone there is C. So then the last short bone we have there, that's our talus, right? Or our talus, depending on how you want to pronounce it. That one is D. Those are just examples. So you do want to know examples of each for sure. Okay, you won't have to classify every single bone in the body and know which one's which, but you do need to have a couple examples of each. Okay, so long bones, some examples. Almost all the limb bones, right, except for the patella, carpals, and tarsals, okay? So all the metatarsals, metacarpals, radius, humerus, ulna, tibia, fibula, you know, all those bones that are longer bones, all those limb bones, okay? Short bones, think of our little tiny ones like our carpals, our tarsals, sesamoids. Our sesamoids are right here, okay? Sesamoid bones are shown right there. So those, we've got some sesamoid bones right there in our toes at the base of our first metacarpal, help with that, with the muscles that flex our big toe. Okay, flat bones, we think of our scapula, ribs, cranial bones, and then irregular bones, vertebrae, like we already said, and then those os coxa bones. So those are some examples for you to remember of each. Okay, so functions of bones, right? So protection, obviously we're thinking of the chest. It helps us protect the heart and lungs, right? So these are our ribs and our sternum, right? So there's some protection there. Obviously our cranial bones protects our brain, right? Our vertebrae protect our spinal cord, okay? Support, right? All of our bones provide support, right? They all hold us up. Without our bones, we would have no shape. We would just be a flat, mushy bag of fluid, right? Cartilage is, as well as that, is good at that too. Cartilage is good at supporting joints, right? So all of our joints are lined with hyaline cartilage, and then in some joints we have fibrocartilage, like when we look at our menisci and our knees, and many other joints have cartilage like that. Movement, well, in order for us to move, obviously we contract muscle, but in order for muscle to do anything, it has to have something hard to pull on, right? So if muscle just pulled on our skin and just pulled really hard on it, our skin would just kind of mush, right? That would move us, right? It has to have a lever to pull on, right? So when that muscle connects to something hard like a bone, it can pull on it, and then we create torque by moving that lever, right? So pulling on a lever, and the bone is the lever, right? So without that hard lever, muscles don't really help us. Okay, blood cell formation. Hematopoiesis, this is formation of red blood cells. So red blood cell formation. So we have bone marrow inside a lot of our bones, and that's where red blood cells are made. We also have white bone marrow, where white blood cells are made. Very important function of bone. Mineral storage. The main ones that are stored here, calcium and phosphate. That's what makes up the hard part of our bone. So it's used structurally, but then also if the body all of a sudden needs some more calcium or phosphate, the bone breaks some of that down and gives it to the body. Okay, so we're in a constant state of turnover with this. So that's some of the functions. All right, let's look at the tissues now. Okay, so skeleton tissues here. I'm gonna move my face. I'm not sure if that's in the way for you, but it looks like it is for me. Okay, so we got two main types of bone. We got spongy bone and we got compact bone. Okay, so spongy bone is always internal, and the characteristics of it are, it kind of has these holes in it, right? It's kind of spongy. There's a lot of fluid soaked in there, a lot of blood vessels. Okay, and it's much softer, right? It definitely still provides support, but it's softer than the other, which is compact bone, and that's always on the external side. So it's very hard, right? It's lined with connective tissue up here. That's our periosteum. Look at that in a second. A lot of times spongy bone has bone marrow. So it has red bone marrow and sometimes yellow bone marrow. We'll talk about what those are here in a sec. Okay, so other bone tissues, obviously cartilage, talked about these. All the different types, hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, fibrocartilage. It's always associated with bone. In some way, cartilage is going to be attached to bone. Okay, and then we got some connective tissue called the periosteum, like I just mentioned. The periosteum is that thin layer of connective tissue on the outside of all of our bones. Okay, what type of tissue is it? This is dense, irregular connective tissue. Okay, so getting back to that histology stuff, dense, irregular connective tissue. Okay, lots and lots of nerve fibers. Okay, have you ever been kicked in the shin before when you're a kid? Maybe your brother or your sister got a little angry at you one time and kicked you right in the shin. I know that happened to me when I was a kid. And that hurts like heck, right? Part of the reason it hurts like heck is because you got all those nerve fibers in your periosteum, and you get kicked right in there, and that hurts. Okay, so it's a connective tissue layer that protects your bone, houses blood vessels, houses nerves, and wraps around all of our bones. Okay, so then we got two different types of marrow. Yellow marrow in adults is fat. Okay, so it's an energy storage. In kids, that same place that we have yellow marrow in adults, like in the big center of our femur, like that, in kids, that would be red bone marrow, okay? Because the kids are still developing their immune system, they're developing their red blood cells, and they need a lot more red bone marrow to make all of that stuff, okay? But then as their blood cell lines are developed, that converts into yellow marrow, because you don't need as much red marrow. And then in adults, we'll see, then in adults, we have it more in the ends of our long bones, okay, like you see there. And that red bone marrow, its main job is to make red blood cells, RBCs, red blood cells. Okay. All right, this is one that if you were here in class, if we were together, I would have you discuss this a little bit with your partner. So just pause it for a second, read through this question, and see what you can come up with, and then unpause it. Okay, so let's read it. Salts, when in their crystallized form, are not flexible, right? They form those crystal structures very hard, okay? They're rock solid. So then how does a bone bend since it's made up of mostly calcium phosphate, which is a salt, okay? Well, we can take a look at this. So the options here, the ionic bonds and covalent bonds and the salts break and reform. Nope, not how salts work, okay? Elastic protein fibers are woven throughout the bone to give it elasticity. No, we don't have elastic protein fibers. Collagen protein fibers are woven throughout the bone. Yes, that is true. Okay, those collagen protein fibers are woven throughout the bone. And then D there, the bonds holding the collagen fibers together can break and reform to allow for extra flexibility. That's cool. These are called sacrificial bonds. Okay, so really both C and D are correct. Okay, so one of the cool things about bone is we think of it being super hard and not bendable at all, but it actually can bend quite a bit. And the reason, it can bend is because it's not all rock solid cells. It has woven throughout these collagen bands that can actually pull apart from each other and then come back together and pull apart and come back together. And that helps it be flexible. It cuts down on fractures big time. All right, so let's look at those different components of bone. So the organic components are only about 1/3 of the total bone matrix. These are cells and the ground substance, which is called osteoid. Okay, osteoid is made up of proteoglycans and glycoproteins. Okay, the function of those guys is to increase water content. Okay, so what do? They increase osmotic pressure, and that pulls water into the bone. As I said, holds onto water. So we need a good amount of fluid in bone. Okay, and then also collagen. Right, so again, this gives it flexibility, gives bone some tensile strength, and helps it resist stretch and twist. Okay, and all of this ground substance is coming from cells called osteoblasts, right? Bone cells that are releasing proteins, releasing these proteoglycans and glycoproteins. Okay, so that's the organic part of bone, only about 1/3 of it. But then the other 2/3 of the bone, the vast majority of it, is made up of inorganic components. Okay, calcium phosphate salts, right? That's the big part of it. It's calcium phosphate salts. So if it was just calcium phosphate salts, bone would look something like that. Okay, it would be somewhat brittle, it would be hard, but a good balance of this gives stiffness and durability. And again, it's really all about this balance of having some organic components, we have some flexibility and stretch resistance, but then we also need a lot of the inorganic components to give it that hard, rock solid feeling that bone has. All right, so there's 4 main types of cells inside a bone. And I'd like you again to take a good guess and maybe even look at these figures here in your book, point 6.6 to 6.8, and take a look and see of these 4 types, we've got osteogenic cells, osteoblasts, osteocytes, osteoclasts. See if you can match those up with these definitions down here, and then unpause it when you're done. Okay, so number 1, which cell is responsible for making the matrix? Okay, one's responsible for making the matrix is the blast, right? Just like those fibroblasts make the matrix in connective tissue, osteoblasts do that, okay? Which cell maintains the bone matrix? These are the cells that are just there, okay? These are the osteocytes, okay? Which cell reabsorbs or actually breaks down the matrix? These are the osteoclasts, okay? And then which cells are found in the membranes and produce new cells? These are the osteogenic cells. Okay, you can get those definitions there. Those are the 4 cell types that you need to know. All right, so another, let's dive a little bit deeper into the different types of bone that we find as far as the different tissues found within bone. Okay, so let's start with the compact bone. Again, this is on the outside. This is very dense, and it has multiple layers within the compact bone, okay, on the outside of all bone. Okay, so the base system of structure within compact bone is called the osteon, also known as the Haversian system. Okay, and this is the structural unit of compact bone. All right, it's cylinder shaped. You can see the cylinders here, right? And there's always going to be a central canal. That's what contains the vein, artery, nerve bundle. Okay, very common to see veins, arteries, and nerves traveling together throughout the body. In each of the little osteons, we have a vein, artery, nerve combo. Okay, that's what the blood vessels are. This is lined with another membrane on the inside called the endosteum. So the periosteum, which would be on the outside, on the inside we find endosteum. And then we have these lamellae, which are these kind of concentric circles, which are cylinders wrapping around each other, right? So each of these are lamellae, getting smaller and smaller as they go down, okay? And you can see the calcium phosphate part, all this white part, but then these black lines here, those are the collagen fibers running through. Okay, and you can see they go in different directions, right? So at one layer they go this way, the other layer they go the opposite way, right? And that allows for stretch and twist resistance in multiple directions in that bone, because remember, collagen is really good at withstanding tensile forces this way. Okay, so if we have some going this way, some going this way, then we can withstand forces that way and that way. Okay. So the osteocytes are found in there, and we can see those little guys, right? These little tiny osteocytes there, and you can see they're kind of reaching their arms out to get nutrients, okay? And those the places they reach their little extensions out are called canaliculi. Canaliculi are little tiny tunnels that connect from where the blood vessels meet to where the osteocytes are, okay? And really, they're gap junctions. Okay, so there's really no diffusion allowed, so we have these little gap junctions instead, and these cells are connecting to each other, or eventually they're connecting down to where there's actually blood and nutrients, right? So this is how those cells pass nutrients and waste products. Canaliculi is how bone cells get nutrients and get rid of waste products. All right, so here's what it looks like. Again, I would recommend you pause this, see if you can label these structures, okay? And we'll go ahead and jump in. All right, so we'll look at these. The question here, which one is the lamellae? Okay, we'll get to that. So A is that central canal, right? We see that right there. B is an osteon, right? There's one osteon there. You can see how there's multiple osteons together there. What happened to my camera? Sorry about that. Not sure why my camera turned off. I'm back now. And then C here, we've got circumferential lamellae, okay? The circumferential lamellae are a little bit different. They're not exactly like osteons. They go all the way around the outside. So we got those on the very far outside, okay? And then we can see D, which are the lamellae, and you can see how those are stretched out here in these multiple layers. All right, and then E would be a perforating canal, okay? Because we've got these central canals this way, but then we've also got to get blood to the inside, so there's got to be some perforating canals going that way. And then again, we see this periosteum on the very outside, and you can see how that houses vein, arteries, and nerves as well. All right. Here's just a little bit closer look of one. This one, you can very nicely see the vein, artery, and nerve traveling together, and you can see those osteocytes and see how they're all connected via these little canaliculi, right? They connect to each other, gap junctions there, connecting those cells, and then eventually those cells are going to connect in here to where the blood will be, and they can get those nutrients they need. Here's a microscopic image of what this looks like. And you can see very similar. You can see the osteocytes. You can see those little cracks almost is what it looks like here. That's those canaliculi connecting the osteocytes. Okay, and then spongy bone. spongy bone is the stuff on the inside. Remember, it's much lighter. It looks like this is kind of just a random spiderweb order, but the amazing part about this bone is it's not random at all. And so what researchers know is that when they look at the structure of the stuff on the inside of spongy bone, which is called trabeculae. Trabeculae are these interconnecting rods or plates of bone. They actually structure themselves in a way to where they're just right to withstand the typical forces that a bone receives. Okay, so if somebody goes from never doing any activity at all, to all of a sudden they become avid tennis player, right? And all of a sudden they're swinging their arm this way a lot. There's a ball hitting that, so there's stress pushing against their bones right here. If we were able to analyze the inside of the ulna and the radius there, then you would find that the trabeculae reorganizes itself in order to be in the right angles to withstand those forces that are now received, right? And that would take months, but that's how dynamic this skeleton and the skeletal tissue is. Okay, there's no central blood vessels here, but again, there's canaliculi that connect the cells within. Okay, and then again, osteocytes in lacuna. Remember the lacuna, those like little caves that they find themselves in, and those are between layers. And what happens really when the bones develop is the osteoblasts are releasing all the matrix, right? But they're really just closing themselves in, right? Because they're releasing all the stuff around themselves. It all solidifies, and now they're stuck in a little lacuna. And they go from being an osteoblast to being an osteocyte because they can't really move anymore. They're stuck in that spot. Okay, so let's look a little bit of the anatomy of a full-size bone, of a long bone, okay? And in long bones, we have two main portions of it, the diaphysis and then the epiphyses. Okay, the diaphysis is the shaft, right? This is the kind of middle part. And you can see that diaphysis here in the middle, okay? And it has a collar of compact bone, right? So you can see that here. That collar of compact bone goes all the way around it. Okay, and then the medullary cavity in the middle is what it's known as, the medullary cavity. That's where yellow marrow is, okay? And then we have the epiphyses of bone. Okay, the epiphyses are the ends, right? This has a shell of compact bone, and then it has spongy bone in the center. But you can see there's no cavity here, right? No cavity. It's solid. Okay, and that spongy bone typically has red bone marrow in it. Not in all bones, but in most bones, most long bones. Okay, and then we have a feature there called the epiphyseal line. We can see one here, we can see one here, see one here, right? These are the growth plates. And when those growth plates finally stop growing, they turn from cartilage to bone, and you see that hard line of compact bone there. Okay, all right, so a little bit more about the long bones. They're all covered in an outer lining of periosteum, okay? And the most outer layer is connective tissue, right? That's what we would see out here. But then the inner layer of that periosteum is cells. This is where we have lots of osteoblasts, osteoclasts, and those osteogenic cells that are there to produce more bone if needed, okay? So this periosteum gives some tensile strength. It gives a place to house blood vessels and nerves. And then this is where all of our connections are, right? So when our muscles come down and fuse into a tendon, and then that tendon has to attach to our bone, that fuses right into our periosteum. Same thing with our ligaments that hold our joints together. That ligament is just fused right into the periosteum, just woven right in. So very strong connecting point there. All right, endosteum. This is on the inside here. So this is connective tissue on the inner part of the cavity, okay? This also contains osteoblasts and osteoclasts, okay? Articular cartilage, we're always gonna have articular cartilage on the end of long bones because that's where joints are. Remember, that's hard, rigid, and smooth, okay? And then again, hematopoietic tissue, okay? This is in spongy bone of flat and irregular bones, okay? And then in that medullary cavity of the epiphyses of long bones, okay? So the epiphyses of long bones, yeah, so that's a little bit confusing. The medullary cavity would be in kids only, right? But then in adults, it's going to be in the epiphyses. Okay, so this part shouldn't really say medullary cavity. It should just say epiphyses of long bones. That's what we have. And then in babies, we have it also in the medullary cavity of the diaphysis of long bones. Okay, and then when we look at a flat, short, or irregular bone, we were just talking about long bones instead, we kind of have this sandwich setup where we're going to have periosteum here, then it goes to compact bone, endosteum there, right? And then it's all spongy bone here, right? So periosteum, compact, endosteum, spongy bone, and then it happens again, right? Then we got endosteum, compact, and periosteum. And that's pretty much the makeup of that. All right, guys, that's all we got for today. We'll see you soon.